Hey everyone, what's going on? I'm Jeff Noble. In this first segment on variables, we're going to talk about what they are, how they're used, how to assign and read them, and put them to work in actual code. This is the Noble Cause Software Development Course. All right, so variables. We've talked about data types, and variables are very closely related to data types. So I've put together a little presentation. We'll make it short and quick, and then we'll jump into Visual Studio and we'll actually put them to work, and you'll be able to write some code yourself. So let's get to it. To explain variables, I'm going to start by using something a little more abstract. I think it's easier to explain that way. So imagine that the memory in your computer is a bunch of boxes. I've represented 3 different boxes on the screen here. So these gray boxes are your actual variables. Okay, and then we have some information or data that we want to store in those variables. So the key thing to understand about the variables here is that the first variable will only hold data that looks like a square. The second one will only hold a circle and a triangle last. Now, normally when talking about variables, we're talking about numbers or letters or words or Boolean true false like we talked about. We're not talking about squares and circles and triangles. So maybe this will help bring it all together. All right, so the information that we want to store cannot go in the wrong place. We cannot store a triangle in a box that is made to hold a square. The square won't fit in the circle won't fit in the triangle. It's not like blocks where if you force it hard enough, you can make it fit. Let's just say they're not gonna fit. All right, but when we get it right, each one will fit and live inside its variable. So this represents a variable holding some data. And as long as the data is the right shape or the right type, it's going to work fine. What if we took away the square, circle, and triangle, and instead of saying square, we're going to call this variable a count. This name count is arbitrary. You can make it anything you want. This could say foo. It doesn't matter. I'm just saying that I'm creating a variable. Its name is count, and it can hold the data type of int. So we can store a number inside count. Count is your box. Int is the type. Just like this gray box is your box, and a square is the type. So this is the same representation. Next variable is string initial. So I'm thinking this will hold the initial of your name, first initial, last initial, some initial. And we've made it a data type of string, which needs to go in double quotes. And then lastly, we have a variable that is called height, and it can hold a double, which is a decimal. All right, so here's data that kind of matches that, right? I have a 7, that's an int, so that would fit in count. I have a J in double quotes, that'll fit in my string, and I have 0.5, which will fit into a double because it's a decimal. Trying to store 0.5 in count won't work because the data type of int won't hold decimals. If you remember, those are whole numbers. The number 7 cannot be held in string. Now you might think, hey, you said digits can be held in a string variable, and you're right if you thought that, but the 7 would still have to be inside double quotes, which it's not. So since it's not, it will be treated as an actual number, not a digit. And so we can't store that in a string. Same thing with a J in quotes cannot be stored in the variable height because it's not a double. So what would it look like if it was right? Well, we could say int count is equal to 1. And then a semicolon. Remember, semicolons go at the end of a statement in C#. It separates one statement from another statement. The number 1 can be stored in count because count is an int. And after that, if we refer to count, we would be working with the value of 1 that's stored inside it. A string initial equals quote J quote semicolon. That's taking the J and assigning it inside the initial box. right? So the variable initial now holds J, and its data type is string. So that's okay. And lastly, 0.5 is being assigned to height. That's fine because height is of type double, and double stores numbers with or without decimals. The easiest way to remember this stuff is whatever is on the right side of the equal sign gets assigned to the variable on the left side of the equal sign. So we just take things on the right and we throw it inside what's on the left. Sometimes there's more than one thing to evaluate on the right, but in the end, you get your value on the right and you put it into the variable on the left. So here's another example page showing how to assign 35 into a variable called age. Yes, I wish I was. I am not. And here is the number 1 being assigned to counter. Both of these are numbers, whole numbers with no decimals. They'll easily go into the data type int. So age would hold 35 and counter would hold 1. So if we tried to print out counter, it would print the number 1. Last, there is Jeff in quotes, and it's being assigned to the variable first name. This is called camel casing. It's very common in C# because C# is case sensitive. So if you're going to refer back to these, make sure the upper and lower cases are correct. If you mix those up, you will run into problems. So I've created a variable called first name. It is of data type string, and I've assigned Jeff into first name. So if I print out first name, it's going to print the word Jeff. And that's it. So let's see it in action and actually jump into code. Okay, here we go. So I've launched Visual Studio, and I'm going to go through this a little quicker. If you need more help getting Visual Studio launched, there's more information in the card above. So I'm going to create new project. I am going to select console application. I'm going to name it episode 2 variables. And I'm going to choose new folder, episode 2. And everything else is fine the way it is. We're going to go with .NET 5. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is reset my window layout. That's in case you've gone into Visual Studio and maybe you closed some things like Solution Explorer. I'm just going to go under Window, Reset Window Layout, and just say yes. And that'll put us back to here so that everybody can be at the same spot. The next thing I'm going to do is before we actually start working in our code, I want to open up a place where we can write some code that we can just kind of throw away, and we can use this as a little place where we can experiment. So if we go under the View menu in Visual Studio, and then down to Other Windows sub-menu, this C# Interactive. So go ahead and select that. And that's going to open up this window at the bottom. So I'm going to just kind of grab where my cursor becomes an up and down arrow between these two windows, and you can resize that. All right, so after a minute, it may take longer the first time for you, so don't worry if you don't see all this Microsoft stuff right away. But this is a little interactive playground for C#. So we're going to do some of the things that we saw in the slides before this, just to show you how they work. So I'm just going to type int space, and I'm going to give my variable the name counter. So if I hit a semicolon and hit enter, that's enough. So if I ask it what counter is and just hit enter, you'll see that it's 0. The reason it's 0 is because I told the compiler to create a variable called counter. I told it to make it type int. Well, int can only hold numbers. Every data type has a default value, and the default value for an integer happens to be 0. So if instead I would have said int counter is equal to 5, and then I type counter, you have to hit enter twice, once for counter and the other one to print out to actually hit enter to go to the next line. So you can see that counter is 5. If I try to say counter is equal to Jeff, it gives me an error. Well, that's because I told counter when I created it, you are only allowed to hold int. But I tried to assign a string in double quotes. And so the compiler tells me I can't implicitly convert type string into type int because it doesn't really know what you meant to do there. It can't make any assumptions because what did you mean by put the word Jeff into a box that only holds a number? If I wanted to create a variable to hold Jeff, I could say string. We'll just call this my name. Remember, the variable name can be anything you want. So my name equals Jeff. And close my quotes and semicolon. So now if I print my name out, I see Jeff. Let's play around with some data types in code. So we know that we can print things out with console.writeLine because we saw when we run this that hello world gets displayed in the output. So I'm going to keep that in mind, and I'm just going to hit enter and move that down a few lines by hitting enter. And I'm going to create some variables. So I'm going to say int my name. Remember, all that stuff that's down on the bottom here that we did in the interactive is thrown away. So that doesn't exist up here. So my name is equal to Jeff. Notice it's underlined in a red squiggly. Why is that? Can you figure it out? The reason is because Jeff is in quotes, and I told it my name only holds an int. So that's an error. So the squiggly line doesn't help you all that much, right? Because it tells you something's wrong, but it doesn't really tell you specifics on the details of why it's wrong. But if you take your cursor with your mouse and you just hover, you don't have to click anything, just hover over that red line, it cannot implicitly convert type string to type int. So when it tells you it can't convert one type to another, you know that either the value you're assigning is the wrong type or the variable only holds a certain type that is not string. So in this case, my error is I made my name int when it should have been string. So now it's happy. Visual Studio also will give you helpful hints while you code. You only have to worry about the red squigglies. Notice my name has a green squiggly. Same thing, you can hover that with your mouse and it'll just tell you the variable my name is assigned, but its value is never used. All that means is we created this variable in the my name, we put a value in it, and then we never did anything with it. The program ends at the last line of code in main here, which is console.writeLine hello world, and then the program exits. So since we didn't do anything with my name, it's just saying, hey, you created something and you never used it, and it just wants you to know that maybe you forgot something. It's kind of like trying to send an email when you forget the subject and Gmail says, hey, there's no subject. Did you want to put one? Or didn't you mean to attach something to that email? That's what the green squiggly is. So you can always hover those squigglies to see what they are. All right. After that one, I'm going to put int my age equals 50. Again, we get the green squiggly, but it's fine. And then I'm going to go and say string last name equals Noble. And I'm going to make a bool called is this cool? And we're going to make it true. Make sure you watch your casing with this, because if you put a capital T, then it's not going to work. It doesn't know what that is. And if you hover that, it'll say the name true does not exist. So make sure you use lowercase true false. All right. The only thing I'm going to change here, I'm going to change my name to first name. That way we have a first name and a last name variable. All right. So now let's print them out. Console.writeLine. And then instead of putting in quotes, remember anything that's in quotes is a string class when it comes to the compiler. Those are called string literals, but they're treated as if they were defined variables like a string. So we can't use quotes when we want to print out actual variables. So I'm going to print out in here first name, right? And then I'm going to copy that. You can either highlight the line, Control C, and then go to the next line and control V, or you could do edit, copy, edit, paste, or you could right click and you could right click and you can copy paste here. I use these control C, control V, control X. All right, so first name, the second one I wanted was last name. And if you mistype this and you put a capital L, it's going to complain and it's going to tell you, I don't know what last name is. It doesn't exist. That's because when you defined your variable, you started it with a lowercase l. So we'll fix that. Another way to duplicate a line is to hit Control and hit the D key, and that will duplicate the line. And so now I'm going to type my age. And then last, I'm going to control D again, and I'm going to put is this. Now notice when I start putting is this cool, Visual Studio suggests for me, hey, are you talking about this? This is cool. I haven't typed the whole thing out yet, but it's now guessing because I created a variable up here that this is what I'm trying to type. I can just hit Tab and it'll complete it for me and leave the cursor at the end. And then I'm going to get rid of this hello world. Make sure you have your 3 closing curly braces to match your 3 opening curly braces. All right, so we've created 4 variables and we've printed all 4 of them out. Let's run it by hitting the green go at the play button. So let's see if we get what we wanted. Jeff Noble 50 true. All right, that's exactly what we told it. What if I wanted Jeff and Noble to be on the same line, but they're in separate variables? I can't just do first name space last name, right? So we have to tell a computer specifically what we want. If we just give it 2 variable names, it's not sure what we want to do with them. We can add or concatenate one variable and another variable. So now what we're saying is take first name and then concatenate or add to the end of it last name. We're going to run into a problem here, but I want to show it to you first. So it did do what we said. It put first name and last name, but notice there's no space there. And the reason that is because it took first name, which is Jeff, and it took last name, which is Noble, and it put them right together. Right? That's what we asked it to do. Put first name and then add to the end or concatenate onto the end the last name. If we wanted, we could add quote space quote plus last name. So now we're saying take first name, concatenate a space, and then concatenate last name. If we do that, then we get Jeff space Noble, just like we want. All right, so what if we did some more stuff with this? What if now I said I want a new variable called int my age plus 10. Okay, all right, now I'm going to copy this line and put this variable in here, and that's going to cause an error also. We're not allowed to print something out if we haven't assigned something to it. So because I declared this variable, my age plus 10, even though it has a default value of 0, before I can use it, I have to do something with it. I can assign it to 0. I could have defaulted it here to 0, and then the error will go away. But I don't want to do that yet. So what I want to do here is I want to say my age. Notice when I put my, Visual Studio is suggesting the 2 variables that I have here. So I want to say my age plus 10 is equal to my age. So what's going to print out on this line? Well, easy enough to figure out. Up here, we have my age equals 50. So when we're talking about my age, and as we saw when we printed it out, it printed 50. So if I create a new variable called my age plus 10, I'm taking the 50 that was in my age, and I'm assigning it to my age plus 10. Now, it's not going to automatically add 10 to that. Remember, this is just a name. I can name it anything I want. I could name this foo, and name this foo, and name this foo. And Visual Studio and the C# compiler are completely happy with that. It doesn't care. I'm going to put that back. First, let's make sure that my age plus 10 holds the same value as my age, which is what this line does. Remember, it takes the value on the right side of the equals and it puts it into the variable on the left side of the equals. So if we run that, there's our extra 50. Now, how do you think we can add 10 to that number? I'm going to duplicate that one. And in between these two, I want to print it out as it was at 50, and then I want to print it out to be 60. So there's a few different ways to do this. In programming, you'll often find that there are many ways to do the same thing. First, we'll do it, my age plus 10 is equal to my age plus 10. My age is an int, and C# has no problem adding numbers or doing any kind of math. So what this is going to do is it's going to take my age and add 10. And when it's done doing that, it's going to assign that into this variable. So now this variable, even though we started with nothing and then we assigned 50, now we're adding 10 to the 50 and assigning it back and kind of overwriting the value that we had assigned here on line 21. Let's run that and see if we get 60. Here it is, 60. What are some other ways to do that? I'm going to comment this out, and we comment in C#. There are two ways to comment. The first way is with double forward slashes, and Visual Studio will turn that line green. What that means is the compiler is going to completely ignore everything after the double slashes, but just on this one line. So I can actually put real comments here, things like, this is one way to show how to add 10, right? It doesn't have to be code. You can type whatever you want. In this case, I'm just putting some English there. All right, so let's do another way. I can say my age plus 10 is equal to my age plus 10 plus 10. Sounds crazy when I say it, but looking at it on the screen, it's the same rule that we followed right here. Remember, we took whatever was in my age, we added 10 to it, and whatever that value was, we overwrote the variable with the new value. Same thing here. What's in my age plus 10? Well, on line 21, we assigned whatever was in my age to my age plus 10. My age, as we know, was set up here on line 10 with the value 50. My age plus 10 became 50 here. I'll just put that in a comment. And remember, from the double slashes onward, it is a comment. So this won't get evaluated by the compiler, only this part will. And so now my age plus 10 is 50. And then here we're saying take that 50, add 10, and assign it back to itself. So we're overwriting the value again with 60, and that will work just fine as well. There's 60. Let's do it another way. Because we have to do things like this so often in programming, C# gave us a shortcut that basically does the same thing that the line above does. And the shortcut is plus equal 10. When it compiles before it runs, it actually turns it into something very similar to this. But what this is saying is take my age plus 10, the variable, and plus equals says take that and add 10 to it and reassign it over. Really, if you think about it, it's removing that from that line. So if I were to manipulate that, just so I don't have to type that variable twice, the reason it can't be equals plus like this is because we can also subtract the same way, and I wouldn't be able to differentiate between assigning a negative 10 to the variable my age plus 10. So they flipped it and they made it plus equal and minus equal. So I'm going to remove that so that it doesn't confuse you, but that's how I think they came up with this syntax. We're also at 60 again. We learned a little bit about how to manipulate some numbers. Let's go farther into this example with first name and last name. There is another way to do this as well. So one way, Control D, I'm going to comment this line out now. One way that we can we can do this is we could just put a space at the end of Jeff and then go back to just first name plus last name. Because there's a space after Jeff, it'll say Jeff space Noble. That'll work fine. The only problem is if you're storing this value first name in the database or using it somewhere else, you probably don't want extra spaces in your data. You want clean data so you don't have to trim things all the time to use them. So I'm almost never a fan of doing that. The next thing we're going to look at is string.format. I'm going to write it up here first, and then we'll move it inside the parentheses so that we write it out to the console. All right, so another way to do that is to format the string with string.format. Make sure capital F, lowercase s, and we open the paren just like we do with console.writeLine. So you can see that the help is going to pop up and tell you that the first parameter we need to fill in here is format, and that's a string. So we automatically know that we're going to need double quotes because it wants a string. And then it's got this weird object question mark arg0. Don't even worry about that. I'm going to show you how easy this is. We're going to just put quotes in there, and let's fill in the values first. So I'm going to put a comma, because notice it's string format, comma, and then all this object nonsense. So I'm going to put the two variables that I want to use in there. So I'm going to put first name, comma, last name. String.format is taking these two guys. And it might be a little weird when to use commas, when not. Don't really get hung up on that. I don't expect you to know this stuff yet. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, that it's completely normal right now. This is really the first time you're seeing it, and I'm throwing a lot at you. All right, I'm not going to get into how the string.format works, and I don't want to talk about the structure of what's going on behind the scenes here. But what I want you to focus on is this is 0, this is 1, and we can keep adding commas and adding more. So if I know I want to print out 0 and then I want to print out 1, I kind of want you to put in 0 and 1 here, but that would just print a string of 0, 1, because remember, anything in between the quotes is a string literal. How do we tell C# that we want to use these variables in place of these numbers? Well, we use curly braces. Curly braces are the shift and square bracket on your keyboard. So we're just going to surround the 0 and the 1 with curly braces. Those are the same curly braces that we use when we define namespaces, classes, and methods. This is going to take this format and it's going to replace it with first name, last name. Let's leave the comma here for a minute and see what this does. So I'm now going to just remove this by Control X and cut it, and I'm going to paste it inside the console.writeLine. We do have to remove the semicolon. Remember, there's only one semicolon at the end. All right, let's run that. We got Jeff, Noble. Well, that's almost what we wanted. We wanted Jeff space Noble. Why are we getting Jeff, Noble? Well, remember, the 0 is just being replaced by this value, and the 1 is being replaced by this value. What's the comma? Well, if it's not in curly braces, it's going to get printed. So if we wanted a space in there, we would get rid of the comma and just put a space. And then it'll have Jeff space Noble. Well, what if we wanted to reverse that? What if I put number 1 first and number 0 second? Remember, this is 0, this is 1. So maybe you want to do last name, comma, space, right? We still have a space there. First name. There you go. Noble, comma, space, Jeff. What if we added another thing in here and we named it my age? Okay, we can just keep going. Now I'm going to change what's in these quotes a little bit. I'm going to say, hi, comma, my name is space. I want Jeff. Or let's not say my name. How about we say, hi, my first name is Jeff, and my last name is space Noble, and now we got to put 2, right? Because we got 0, 1, 2. So now it should print out this, and now you see why it's called a format, because you're giving it kind of a template here inside the quotes, and you're just saying, hey, replace the 0, the 1, and the 2 with 0, 1, and 2. And now we get, hi, my first name is Jeff, and my last name is Noble, and I'm 50. Let's copy this line. And I'm going to steal the inside here and Control X and paste that on the line above just to get console.writeLine out of the way so we can see what we're doing. Oops. And I don't want an error, so I'll put the semicolon back. We'll have to remove that again. All right, so instead of string.format, we can get rid of that and the ending paren for string.format. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a $sign in front of this. And what the $sign does is it says, hey, I'm going to give you a string. I want you to interpolate it. So interpolation is a bit easier than this whole 0, 1, 2 thing. All of this stuff is going to go away. And we're going to take the actual variable name and we're going to replace them with 0. Last name is going to go where 1 was. And age is going to go where 2 was. So let's get rid of all that. It's complaining right now because it wants me to assign it to something. Right? Then it won't complain. So all we did was we took out the 0, 1, and 2 and we put the actual variable names in there. We put them in curly braces, though, so that C# knows I don't want you to just print out text, right? If I just put first name here, if I just put that there, it's just going to treat it like any other word here, and it's going to print it into the console. It's not going to put the value Jeff. It's going to put the word first name just like that. So by surrounding it with curly braces, notice Visual Studio tells you, hey, I'm going to treat this as the value that's in this variable, not the word first name, which is what we want. So now if I take this guy and I put it inside console WriteLine and get rid of that extra semicolon we added in, these two lines will print out the exact same thing, but look how much less typing there is there. So I prefer the interpolation way just because, A, I don't have to remember what position 0, 1, or 2 my variables are in, and there could be a whole lot of them here, so you really would have to count them out. It's easier for me to kind of read this as if it's English and just say, oh, well, this is going to print with whatever's in that variable, which in this case is Jeff. And notice when I double click this, Visual Studio highlights it up here so that I can reference what the value is. If I double click last name, it'll light up last name. All right, let's run it. So you see those two lines are exactly the same. And that's interpolation. We can do the same thing with a Boolean. I can put a comma and say, is it cool? And then I can put, is this cool? And put that in curly braces. So it's going to say, is it cool? Question mark space, true. And there you go. So I want you to play around with these variables and printing things out. I want you to use all the data types that you can. Use decimal and use double and long and all the ones we've learned about. Try and think up different formats and see if you can get the format you want. If you need help, ask for help in the comments. I'm happy to reply. I try to get to those quickly. And if you have any questions, I'll look for them there. And that brings us to the end of this video. So in summary, what we've done is we learned about how to create variables, how to assign values to those variables. We learned how to copy the value of one variable into another variable. We learned about concatenation and how to append one variable to another. We learned that we can do math on numeric types. You can do any kind of math, so you know how to decrement, just use minus instead of plus. And we learned about string formatting and interpolation. That's a lot to cover in one lesson. We will cover a couple more things about variables in the next video, and we'll also look at some conditionals, and I'll see you online.